The courtroom sat in stillness, bathed in the cold glow of fluorescent lights. Every sound, the scratch of a pen, the clearing of a throat, echoed against the wood-paneled walls. Paul Landers, 71, was escorted inside, his thin frame nearly drowning in a faded military jacket that hung from his shoulders. His hands were cuffed in front of him, but he offered no resistance. His eyes remained fixed on the floor, studying his worn combat boots, once symbols of duty, now relics of a forgotten time. "State your name for the record," the clerk announced, voice crisp with practiced efficiency. "Paul Landers," he replied, his voice quivering yet dignified. After a brief pause, he added, "United States Army." Judge Gregory Weller adjusted his glasses, glancing perfunctorily at the file before him. His expression, typically a mask of judicial neutrality, suddenly faltered. His fingers froze mid-page turn. Something in those papers had caught his attention. A detail, a name, a memory stirred from decades of dust. Light from the windows cast shadows across the judge's weathered face. At 65, his countenance bore the map of a long career, each line etched by thousands of decisions. But today, something different flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the ghost of a memory. The bailiff noticed nothing amiss as he recited the standard opening. The prosecutor arranged her notes methodically, preparing to present a simple case against yet another homeless vagrant disturbing the peace. The few spectators in attendance, mostly law students and courthouse regulars, paid little attention to the elderly defendant or the judge's momentary hesitation. "The court will now hear case number 247B, County versus Paul Landers," announced the clerk. The judge's knuckles whitened around his gavel. No one in the courtroom noticed how Judge Weller's breathing had changed, how his gaze lingered longer than necessary on the old man standing before him. No one noticed how he blinked rapidly, as if clearing not just his vision, but decades of accumulated dust from a memory he thought he had safely buried. "Proceed," Judge Weller finally said, his voice carrying an undercurrent of something unreadable. The prosecutor rose, smoothing her blazer with practiced precision. "Your Honor, the defendant stands charged with trespassing and resisting removal from private property." She detailed the case with cold efficiency. On a night when temperatures had dropped below freezing, Paul Landers had been discovered huddled against a bakery's heating vent, consuming half a loaf of day-old bread given to him by a sympathetic dishwasher. When security asked him to leave, he had asked for just 10 more minutes of warmth. This simple request was recorded as resistance. Paul had no legal representation. No public defender had been assigned. He stood alone, as he had for much of his life since returning home from war. "Does the defendant wish to make a statement?" Judge Weller asked, his voice strangely soft. Paul straightened his posture, a soldier's instinct never truly forgotten. "I don't ask for forgiveness, Your Honor. Just needed some warmth. Didn't mean to trouble anyone." His voice, though weathered, carried unexpected composure. "Been cold before. Vietnam, 68. Afghanistan later. But the cold hurts worse now. Bones don't heal right after all these years." The courtroom atmosphere shifted subtly. A law student stopped taking notes. A bailiff's rigid posture softened slightly. "You served in both conflicts?" Judge Weller inquired, deviating from procedure. "Yes, sir. Re-enlisted after September 11th. Couldn't sit by. Not when I could still serve." Paul's eyes lifted briefly, revealing a flash of the man he once was. "Memory's not what it used to be. Doctors call it something fancy. I just know faces fade in and out. Names, too. But I remember the important things." The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. What had begun as a routine case was veering into uncomfortable territory. "And what do you consider important, Mr. Landers?" the judge pressed. "The promises we make. The people we save." Paul's voice cracked slightly. "The ones we couldn't." Judge Weller's gaze remained fixed on Paul, studying him with an intensity that transcended the case at hand. The courtroom had fallen completely silent, the earlier shuffling and whispers extinguished. "Your Honor," the prosecutor interjected, "while the defendant's service is commendable, it doesn't excuse—" "I understand the law, Counselor," Judge Weller cut in, his tone carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. He turned back to Paul. "Mr. Landers, were you offered any veterans' services upon your arrest?" Paul's smile held no joy. "They asked if I was registered with the VA. I am. Been waiting on disability approval for 3 years now. Papers get lost. Appointments get missed when you don't have an address." Judge Weller nodded slowly, a decision forming behind his eyes. The heavy courtroom doors swung open with deliberate force. A tall man in an impeccable suit entered, his presence commanding immediate attention. "John Doyle, Your Honor, from Hamilton and Reed. I'll be representing Mr. Landers from this point forward." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Hamilton and Reed was no small-time firm. They represented governors and corporate executives, not homeless veterans accused of trespassing. Paul's bewilderment was evident. "I don't understand. I can't afford—" "Pro bono, Mr. Landers," Doyle explained, placing a reassuring hand on Paul's shoulder. "Some battles deserve the best ammunition we can muster." Judge Weller studied this unexpected development. "This is highly irregular, Counselor. Your firm filed no notice of representation. An oversight we'll remedy immediately. Given the circumstances, I request a brief recess to confer with my client." "Granted. Court will reconvene in 30 minutes. As the courtroom emptied, Judge Weller retreated to his chambers, closing the door firmly behind him. With trembling hands, he unlocked his desk drawer and withdrew a worn leather portfolio. Not a legal document, but something far more personal. Inside was a letter, folded and refolded countless times, the creases deep with years of handling. It was from his younger brother, Captain Eli Weller, written days before he was killed in Kandahar in 2002. The judge's eyes found the passage he had read hundreds of times. "You wouldn't believe what happened yesterday, Greg. We were ambushed on routine patrol. Thought I was done for when a sergeant named Landers pulled me from the wreckage. Through gunfire, Greg. Man's got more courage than sense. Docs say I'll be back on my feet in no time, thanks to him. If I make it home, I'm buying that man a beer for the rest of his life." Eli never made it home. A second ambush 3 days later saw to that. Judge Weller studied the photo included with the letter. A group of soldiers, arms around each other's shoulders. His brother in the center, and beside him, a younger, stronger version of the man who now stood before his court. When proceedings resumed, the atmosphere had transformed. John Doyle presented service records, medical evaluations documenting PTSD and traumatic brain injury, and letters from former commanding officers attesting to Paul's exemplary service. As Doyle concluded, Judge Weller posed a question that had nothing to do with the case at hand. "Mr. Landers, do you recall serving with Captain Eli Weller?" The courtroom fell silent. Paul's brow furrowed with concentration, fighting against the fog of his damaged memory. "Weller," he repeated slowly. "Tall kid. Smart. From Montana?" His eyes suddenly widened with recognition. "The convoy. He was trapped. Told me to go. Save myself instead." Paul's voice strengthened. "I never leave a man behind. I promised myself that—" A hushed gasp swept through the spectators. From the back of the courtroom, a man in his 40s stood, a Marine Corps veteran's cap clutched in his hands. "Your Honor, I served with Mr. Landers in Helmand Province. He pulled 3 of us from a burning Humvee in '04. I owe him my life, sir." Another voice joined in. "He carried me 2 miles with a bullet in his own leg during the Tet Offensive." Judge Weller's composure threatened to break. Mr. Landers is not just a homeless veteran. He's a hero who's been failed by the very nation he repeatedly risked his life to protect. Paul's eyes glistened. "I'm no hero, Your Honor. Just did what needed doing." "Sometimes," Judge Weller replied, "that's exactly what makes a hero." Judge Weller called for a 15-minute recess. When the court reconvened, 3 uniformed military officers accompanied him to the bench. Their presence lent the proceedings an air of ceremony that silenced the room. "Paul Landers," Judge Weller announced, "this court has contacted the Department of Veterans Affairs and reviewed your military record in its entirety. It seems certain commendations were overlooked." The senior officer stepped forward, holding a velvet box. "Sergeant First Class Landers, it is my honor to present you with the Distinguished Service Cross, upgraded from your previous Silver Star, in recognition of extraordinary heroism in combat operations in 2002. Paul stood motionless, disbelief etched across his weathered face. "I don't understand." "Your actions saved 9 lives that day, including my brother's," Judge Weller explained, his judicial demeanor finally giving way to raw emotion. "Though he was lost days later, your courage gave us, precious final days." The highest-ranking officer saluted Paul. "Your nation owes you a debt it can never fully repay." Paul returned the salute instinctively, his back straightening, years seemingly falling away. "As for the charges before this court," Judge Weller continued, "they are dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, this court orders immediate processing of your long-delayed benefits." John Doyle stepped forward. "Your Honor, my firm has arranged temporary housing for Mr. Landers, and we'll ensure his transition to permanent VA housing within 30 days. 1 week later, Paul sat in a small but clean apartment, a lifetime of service acknowledged at last. A knock at the door revealed Judge Weller, out of his robes, holding an envelope. "Eli wrote this the day before he died," he explained, handing Paul a letter. "He never had the chance to mail it." Paul's hands trembled as he read the words of gratitude from a young captain whose life he had briefly saved. Tears traced paths down his weathered cheeks. "I kept my promise," Paul whispered. "Didn't leave anyone behind." "No," Judge Weller agreed, placing a hand on the old soldier's shoulder. "And now, we won't leave you behind either." Not everyone who remains silent is invisible. Some have performed great acts in darkness, needing only a moment of recognition, one calling of their name to stand tall again. Society doesn't lack courageous people. It lacks the patience to listen. Delayed acknowledgement cannot erase wounds, but it can begin healing. Sometimes, what a person needs isn't money or titles, but the feeling that they haven't been forgotten. When we take time to see beyond appearances, we often discover heroes walking among us. Ordinary people who, in extraordinary moments, chose courage over comfort, service over self-preservation. Their dignity never truly fades.